Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. So one of the biggest challenges people face when it comes to building muscle is knowing exactly how you should be training for maximum results. And so in this video, I'm going to explain the 4 key factors you want to be focusing on and how you can practically apply them in your training. So factor number 1 is your training intensity. Now your intensity can dictate both the stress as well as the amount of stimulus that you're going to get from each set, and can be broken down into the intensity of load, so how much weight you're using and what rep range you're training in, and the intensity of effort, so how close you are to muscular failure. Now, in the past, people would say that you've got to train between 8 to 12 repetitions to build muscle, but in recent years, research has shown that you can build similar amounts of muscle if you're training with heavy weights and low reps, and if you're training with light weights and quite high reps. So as long as the set lasts long enough and you're able to do at least 5 repetitions, and it isn't so light that you're not able to do more than 30 repetitions, you're probably going to get similar results from both types of training. Now, there is an individual component to how well you build muscle with specific rep ranges. So some people might be able to build muscle a lot better with lower repetitions, whereas someone else might be able to do it a lot better with higher repetitions, but that is something that you'll need to figure out for yourself. It's also quite exercise dependent, so think about doing a barbell back squat or an RDL. That is probably not ideal if you train with really high repetitions, whereas if you do an isolation exercise like a dumbbell lateral raise or bicep curl, then you can do higher repetitions. It's probably not ideal if you train with less than 10 reps. So a good practical recommendation would be to do most of your work within the 5 to 15 repetition range. And if you're doing barbell compound exercises, then probably the 5 to 10 rep range is where you want to do most of your training. Whereas if you're doing isolation exercises, it's probably wise to stay in the 10 to 15 repetition range. But just know that if you have some joint pain, that you can build muscle similarly if you do really high repetitions. The other really important component when it comes to training intensity is your effort. So how close you are to muscular failure. Now, this gets measured with RIR, or repetitions in reserve. So if you train with a weight where you're able to do 10 repetitions, but you stop at 8 repetitions, then you would have 2 repetitions in reserve, so 2 RIR. Whereas if you did 9 repetitions, you would have 1 RIR, and if you did 10 repetitions, so you couldn't do another rep, then you would be at 0 RIR. Now, in general, the closer you train to failure, the more stimulative a set gets. So you might think, well, I'll just train to failure all the time. But that might not be ideal either, just because if you train to failure, there are some disadvantages. One, you're going to negatively impact your performance on subsequent sets and subsequent exercises within a training session. And then you're also going to induce a lot more muscle damage that way, which means that you'll have to recover for a lot longer. And so you won't be able to train your muscles as frequently during the week, which in turn could reduce your training volume during the week. Another factor that you need to consider is that on some exercises, it's really not that practical to train to failure, and it could potentially even be dangerous. So think about doing a barbell back squat or doing a bench press without a spotter. In that case, you probably never want to go to failure. I'd say a good compromise is to do the first couple of sets at about 1 to 2 RIR, and then do the last set to failure if it's safe to do so. And then on more technical, lower body compound exercises, you want to keep pretty much 1 repetition in reserve at all time. Now, the next factor is your training volume, which means the total amount of work that you're performing in your training. And this is super important because you don't just want to be training hard, you also want to be doing enough of that training during the week, because training volume has been shown to have a strong relationship with how much muscle you're able to grow. Now, the way that we count training volume for hypertrophy is by looking at the number of hard sets that you do for a given muscle group per week. Now, what we see with the amount of volume you do and muscle growth is the so-called inverted U effect, which basically means that the first few sets give you the most muscle growth, and then every additional set gives you less and less effect. And then after a specific point, adding more sets will not benefit you, and if you continue to add sets, you will even see a reduction in the amount of progress that you're able to make. So doing more isn't necessarily better, and it can even set you up for overuse injuries. The research shows that doing anywhere from 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week is on average going to optimize muscle growth for most people. But that is just an average number, and some people might need less than that. So you might be able to build muscle optimally with 8 sets per week, whereas someone else might need 24 sets per week. And it's not just going to be different between person to person, but also depending on the muscle group that you're training. So for instance, I might need 12 sets for my chest, but I might only need 8 sets for my quads, and maybe even 20 sets for my arms. So that's just something that you'll have to figure out yourself. I probably recommend that you start with a lower amount of volume, so maybe like 10 sets for your large muscle groups, and about 6 sets for your smaller muscle groups, so your biceps, your triceps, your side delts, and so on, and focus on keeping the training quality high. So making sure that you're pushing pretty close to failure and that your exercise technique is also on point. And if you feel like you're making progress, then there's no real reason to change anything. Whereas if you feel like you're plateauing, and it's not because you're not recovering well, so you're sleeping enough, you're eating enough, then you can add volume. And then you also probably want to split up your volume over the week, so you don't just want to do all of your volume for a given muscle group in one single session, but rather make sure that you train each muscle group at least twice. An easy way to do that is just to have a simple upper-lower body split, where you train your upper body twice a week and your lower body twice a week. And if you've been enjoying this video so far, make sure you like this video and subscribe for more content like this. So the third factor is your exercise selection. And you'll see people both overemphasize this as well as underemphasize this. And what I mean by this is that you can have the best exercise in the world, but if you're not training hard enough and you're not doing enough volume, then that's not really going to matter. Whereas on the other hand, if you're training really hard and you're doing a lot of volume, but the exercise that you're doing simply isn't really targeting the muscle that you want to grow, then that's also not going to be effective. Now for muscle growth, the nice thing is that you can be pretty flexible because there simply aren't any mandatory exercises that you need to do. Sure, if you want to build strength, if you want to build a bigger bench press or a bigger deadlift, then you are going to have to do those specific exercises because strength is a skill and you need to be specific. But if you just simply want to build a better body, then simply pick the exercises that suit you and your biomechanics the best. So to figure out what exercises are best for you, a simple 4-step checklist that you can use is: number 1, does the exercise actually work to target muscles? So do you get a good mind-muscle connection? And if you go all the way to failure, is that muscle that you're trying to train actually the thing that is the limiting factor? So let's say you're doing a bench press and you're pushing all the way to failure, but it's actually your triceps giving out before your chest. In that case, the bench press might not be the best exercise for you. Number 2 is, can you actually progress safely over time on the exercise? So over the next couple of weeks and months, are you able to add either some weight or some kind of reps on the exercise? Number 3 is, can you do the exercise pain-free and without discomfort? So again, let's say you're doing a bench press and you kind of feel like your shoulders are always hurting when you're doing the exercise. Maybe you feel it in your chest, maybe not, but you're always having trouble with your shoulders. Well, in that case, I would probably say the bench press is not the best exercise for you, and you might be better off doing a dumbbell bench press or a push-up instead. And then number 4, and I think that's really underrated, is, do you actually enjoy doing the exercise? Because if you enjoy doing an exercise, then you're going to put a lot more effort into the exercise and going to get a lot more out of it. And if an exercise that you want to do ticks all of these 4 boxes, then I would say for you personally, that's a great exercise and you can definitely incorporate it into your training program. And it doesn't really matter that much if you're doing machine exercises or free weight exercises or even both in your training program, because they both have their advantages and disadvantages. But both have been shown to be similarly effective at building muscle mass. You can also choose if you want to do more compound exercises or more isolation exercises. If you're pretty short on time, I'd probably advise you to use mainly compound exercises, just because they're a lot more efficient and you can train multiple muscle groups at once. But isolation exercises have the advantage of targeting a specific muscle, and maybe if you've got a weak muscle group, so let's say for instance your chest is a weak muscle group, then doing some kind of isolation exercise like a fly can definitely help you target that muscle a little bit more specifically. And so in general, I would recommend that you pick about 1 to 2 compound exercises and about 1 to 3 isolation exercises per muscle group. And if after a couple of months you feel like you're not really getting that much out of the exercise anymore, you're not able to progress, and maybe it's hurting your joints a little bit, then just simply switch to another exercise. Now, factor number 4 is your exercise technique. So even though this is the last big factor, it doesn't mean that it's not important. And if you mess this one up completely, then it can definitely negatively impact your ability to build muscle mass. So for example, let's say you're doing a barbell back squat, and on the descent, you're really bending forward at the waist, and you're turning it more into a good morning. Then that's definitely going to be a lot less effective at building your quads than if you would stay nice and upright and really push your knees forward. Now you can mostly avoid this by just picking the appropriate amount of weight, making sure that you actually take the time to learn the exercise, and then also make sure that you're just picking exercises that actually fit you and your personal biomechanics. Next, you want to perform each repetition under control and make sure that you're not performing your repetitions too quickly, but also not too slowly, because both of those have been shown to be inferior for muscle growth. But you don't really need to overthink this. And a recent research paper found that as long as you're performing reps that last between 2 to 8 seconds, you're going to be able to maximize muscle growth. Lastly, you also want to make sure that you're training over the appropriate range of motion. And here you probably want to be emphasizing training at long muscle lengths. So in other words, getting a good stretch on the muscle. because the stretch part of the movement has been shown to be the most important aspect when it comes to building muscle mass. In general, I would advise that most people train over a full range of motion. So in other words, if you're doing a squat, you want to go all the way down and get all the way back up. Or if you're doing a bench press, you want to touch the bar all the way to your chest, straighten your arms out at the top. But there has been recent research that has found that doing long length partials, so in other words, doing partial repetitions in the stretch part of an exercise, can be more beneficial than training over a full range of motion. However, we do need more research on this topic, and it might only apply to specific exercises and specific muscle groups. And also from a joint health perspective, I think it's probably still a good idea to include at least some full range of motion training. I think the biggest thing when it comes to exercise technique is that you're consistent, because that will allow you to accurately track your performance in the gym over time. And if you've set up your intensity, your volume, and your exercise selection correctly, and you're able to execute them in the appropriate way, then over the weeks and months, you should see your gym performance go up. Of course, you also want to make sure that your nutrition is on point. So if you want to learn how to set up a diet plan for muscle growth, then just check out this video right here where I explain this in detail. So as always, thank you so much for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.